Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're talking about a finish that can literally transform a boring, flat room into an architectural masterpiece. We're talking about lime washing walls. It's honestly one of the most rewarding DIY projects you can tackle, giving you this deep, layered look that feels like, a professional spent 3 days working on it. But to actually get that stunning result, we really need to understand how this unique material behaves.
Because here's the thing. Why does DIY lime wash usually end up looking like an accidental, patchy mess, instead of that elegant, centuries-old plaster we see all over magazines? I mean, the stakes are pretty high when you're completely changing the texture and color of your living space, right? And there is one very specific failure point where almost all amateurs stumble.
Which brings us to the real problem. You see, the fundamental mistake people make is treating mineral lime wash exactly like standard latex wall paint. Standard paint is designed to dry perfectly flat, right? And you just apply it systematically in straight overlapping rows. Lime wash is a totally different beast. It dries with texture, and it absolutely requires you to manipulate it while it's still wet on the wall. If you just try to roll it on and walk away like normal paint, you're basically guaranteeing a failure.
So let's look at the golden rules of lime wash. Now, what's really interesting about this step is that the magic actually happens with a technique known as the wipe back. After you apply the lime wash, and strictly while it is still wet, you lightly drag a damp rag or a sea sponge over the surface. This physical action literally pulls the paint from the high spots and settles it right into the brush valleys. That's what creates that layered, dimensional, aged look. Varying your pressure and direction gives it an organic feel instead of looking like some stamped, artificial pattern.
But that brings us to a massive obstacle. What is the ultimate enemy of achieving that perfect wipe back? Well, it's drying time. If the paint sets and dries before you can play with it, you're just left with harsh lines and a permanently uneven finish. Your drywall actually wants to suck the moisture out of the paint immediately, basically stealing your window of opportunity.
So we're essentially winning the race against time here.
To actually succeed at this, our approach has to do 3 specific things. First, it absolutely must extend the working time per section. Second, it needs to prevent those hard, visible lap lines where one section dries before the next one even starts. And third, it has to allow for smooth, continuous variation as we do our wipe back. So our success relies entirely on buying ourselves enough time to actually work the paint.
And this is exactly why choosing your product isn't just about picking a pretty color. It's about chemistry. A true mineral formula, like Roma Bio Classico, is widely used by pros because it actually behaves the way authentic lime wash should. It gives you those crucial 5 to 8 minutes of workable time per section. Cheaper water-based alternatives, on the other hand, often dry way too fast, and that fast drying time is exactly what gives you rush patches and hard lines instead of authentic carbonation. Choosing a proper mineral formula buys you the time you need to execute the technique without, completely panicking.
Let's move on to the step-by-step method.
The actual physical application is just a continuous, repeating loop. First, you've got to lightly mist your wall section with clean water using a spray bottle. This is absolutely essential, especially on smooth drywall or porous brick, because it stops the wall from instantly pulling the moisture out of your lime wash. Second, you apply that first coat in a bold crosshatch or an X pattern, working in roughly 2 by 2 foot sections. Finally, within 2 to 3 minutes, you do that wipe back technique while the paint is still wet. So it's mist, crosshatch, wipe back. That is your rhythm.
Now, as you move across the room, keep this massive pro tip in mind. Never work a section to completion. You have to keep a wet edge by working in overlapping columns, moving top to bottom, and then shifting over to the next column. A super common amateur mistake is finishing one distinct square, letting the edge completely dry, and then starting the next one. That just leaves a permanent, hard boundary right between the two.
You're also going to need the right instrument in your hand to pull off those crosshatch strokes. A standard, stiff paintbrush from your local hardware store just isn't going to cut it here. You really need a Marmarino or Classico brush with long, flexible, natural bristles. Those specific bristles are what allow you to apply significant pressure and drag through the paint, creating that necessary directional texture without just scratching all the paint off the wall.
Okay, once that first coat goes on, I really need you to manage your expectations. Mineral lime wash dries significantly lighter than it looks when it's wet. Like, expect it to dry 30 to 40% lighter. Please do not panic at this stage. Almost every first-timer looks at the dried first coat and completely freaks out thinking they've ruined the whole project because it looks super pale and extremely patchy.
But that pale, patchy stage is totally normal. The first coat is really just your foundation. It gives you base coverage and your initial texture. The real magic, that happens when you apply the second coat. This is where you build genuine depth. By applying the second coat just a bit thicker in areas where you want more color and wiping back more aggressively where you want that aged effect, the contrast between the two coats creates a visual thickness that perfectly mimics decades of natural weathering.
Finally, fixing mistakes and curing. So the crucial point to remember is that mineral lime wash is actually incredibly forgiving. If a section just doesn't look right, you can simply re-wet it with water within the first hour and literally rework the texture with your rag. Even after it dries completely, a third very thin coat can easily blend right over any problem areas. The goal here isn't factory perfection, right? It's a slow, organic buildup. And keep in mind, the true finish won't even be revealed right away. The wall is going to fully carbonate and harden over the next 2 to 4 weeks, becoming more durable and settling into its final, beautiful state.
So, are you ready to let the lime wash work naturally for a stunning finish? Look, by understanding the chemistry, controlling your working time, and just trusting the layered process, you can totally achieve an incredible professional level result. If you want the full breakdown, including surface-specific tips for things like plaster or brick and links to the exact tools we talked about today, make sure to check out the full article. Once you master this technique, you kind of have to ask yourself, what other flat, lifeless walls in your home are just waiting for a true architectural revival? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.